back, everybody, to the SmallTown Collectibles YouTube channel. I'm Jimmy Don Kerr. My guest today is another one of those channels that when I got back into the community, that I immediately gravitated to. A lot of great, spec talk, final order cutoff videos, interviews, just general comic book knowledge, and I was immediately drawn to its host and his co-host at the time. And I've been a big fan ever since. So I want everybody to join me in welcoming to 10 Questions, Simpleman's Comics.
Thanks. Hey, I appreciate you having me on here. I jumped at the chance, reached out. I was kind of on vacation in Florida, but hey, I'm glad we hooked up. Always love talking comics. Always love, meeting other people in the comic community. I've been watching your channel, some great videos, a lot of familiar faces that you've had on this very show, and you have great content on your show. And, I'm up to share it with my viewers and make sure that people know that your community is out there, because I love seeing people come into that YouTube community each and every day. And it's great to talk comics with other comic book fans. So thanks.
Absolutely. No, man, I appreciate you coming on. And like I said, I really did. When I got back in around, I tell, my origin story, then I'll ask yours. I started collecting as a kid, but then I had that period of time, where I stopped, college up until I really had some extra disposable income, and was out with my kids one day. They were shopping. I hate to shop, and found a comic book store, went in, and I was like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. So how did you, everybody has a different story about how they got into collecting comic books. Like what's your origin story?
Yeah, I mean, it really started as a kid. I was actually more of a sports cards collector before. So I, heavy on, and when I say sports cards, it was mostly baseball, which led me, like we talked previous before the show, how I became a big Giants fan from baseball, like in '87. And, I kind of read a little bit, but it was mostly like my, how parents are when you're a kid. You need to read more. You need to read more. And I didn't like Charlotte's Web or any of those type books. So I would start reading like Archie Double Digest, because they were on the spinner racks right by the checkout at the grocery store. I'm talking 80s. I'm an 80s kid. But and then that kind of reading those Archie books, Archie Double Digest. I wasn't big on the normal comic books yet. And then, of course, '89. You got the Tim Burton Batman movie, and that changed like the landscape at the time. And I was like, this movie's so cool. Let me find out more about this. And it kind of got me into DC books, big Batman fan, which kind of opened that. If, that was my gateway drug into, hey, there's something great in these books, which led to Big Two. And I was reading mostly, Batman, became a huge Thor fan for Marvel, was reading Avengers books. I've never been a big X-Men fan. I get a lot of gripe for that, but I'm more like the Avengers, Spider-Man, classic Marvel characters, classic DC characters. And then when I got out of high school, went to the Marine Corps. So it was around that 90s bubble as well, but I wasn't even part of the bubble because I kind of just drifted off from collecting comics. And like you, I kind of got back into it, and it was about 2008-ish. Started picking up books again because, again, we had more superhero movies that was like good for once. For a while, superhero movies kind of stunk.
Right.
Iron Man, and more started coming out. So I went and started picking up that, and then of course led into New 52, and then from that point I kind of branched over into more indie comics. And to this day, I'm actually more of an indie comic fan than the big two. I still love my classic characters. My favorite character is Thor, and Batman, of course. Green Lantern fan. But ever since then, I started getting back into comics. There's not a lot of people in Southern Maryland where I live that talked comics at the time. We have a lot more now with the MCU, the DCU, everything on media. But at the time, there wasn't many DC fans for me to find. So that led me to like online groups. Google Plus was a big one. I got into CBSI, or comic book speculation investing, and started making friends in there. And then ever since then, I've met a lot of great friends, whether on Google Plus, YouTube, Instagram. I mean, comics is one of the best communities out there, and led me to your channel as well. And now we're on here talking comics, and I love it.
That's awesome, man. So something you said, and I just wonder if it's the X-Men. So I am not really an X-Men fan either. Okay. And I don't know, because when I was a kid growing up, the things that were on TV were basically, Super Friends, You had some Spider-Man, but I think I missed the whole X-Men.
I think you bring up a great point because that's me too. Because I always talk like my nostalgia fuels my collection, and a lot of the X-Men fans are like that, just that generation right behind us with that '90s animated cartoon, right? I didn't watch a lot of that, but there's a lot of fans I think that grew out of X-Men with that cartoon, whether it was after school, and yeah, it's just something I didn't gravitate to. There are some characters within the X-Men that I like, but I've never been like huge X-Men collector and going after X-Men books. And
Yeah,
today I've even talked about it plenty of times, even more so because it seems like every X-Men title, there's like too many titles to kind of keep up with. And I'm too ignorant to know the back lore, the stories, the all the different arcs, how they carry over, that we get hundreds of new releases each
right.
Wednesday. So it's like, oh, I'll pick one up every now and then, but for the most part, nothing against X-Men. It's just not my cup of tea.
Yeah, me either. And like I said, I like the movies, and I've watched the movies when they come out, and I enjoy those, and like Wolverine, and and all that stuff when I watch the movies. But just as far as reading, I just when you mentioned that, I was like, me too, because I think that must have been, yeah, like you said, the generation behind us. Because I'm a kid of the '80s too. Like I remember the spinner rack at the supermarket. Like one of my favorite characters of all time is Firestorm. And the entire reason that he is one of my favorite characters is because that was the first book I really saw it was Batman and Firestorm and Superman, and those were the books I saw. And those colors, that orange and yellow, were just I don't know, just stood out to me as a kid, and so I'm a Firestorm fan today. All
Yeah,
right,
and
so
one of the things that, sorry, not to cut you
no,
off.
go ahead. No, go
One of
ahead.
the things that kind of the genesis to like an actual collection, besides picking up a book here and there, is back in the day, the Sears and J.C. Penney Christmas catalog. They had like a almost like a comic book collector starter kit where it had like some poly bags, no boards, but some bags, and they gave you like 25 Marvel or DC mismatched comics. And at the time, it was like great. I didn't know what monetary value or anything about comics, just like collecting comics just to collect them. And it was like, hey, there's a great bunch of titles to get into, and that kind of leads you and you start reading different books. But that's kind of what started like the collection. And I didn't have a short box; I had a Xerox box, and they just kind of
Yep.
sat in there like in a poly bag, no boards.
No, absolutely. What my uncle, and I told this story a lot on here, and anybody that watches this channel on the regular knows that my uncle was really the what got me into it, because he sold at flea markets, and I was the same way. It was trading cards. I started with trading cards. Then I would be at the flea market with him, and he would sell some trading cards. He would sell comic books, and I would go hang out with him. And I compare him all the time to Mike Wolf from American Pickers. That's who my uncle was. Like if you could encapsulate my uncle in another person, it's Mike Wolf. And that's really how it all started for me. So, all right, question two, and I always find this interesting as far as how people collect, because I am a reader. I like to read, okay, and I love to read titles, and so I am a reader who almost collects, who picks up some keys from time to time. Are you a reader who collects, or are you just a collector? Like you collect keys and grails and things like that?
I would say it's a kind of a hybrid of both. Like as you get older, as you have a family job, I wish I could read comics all day, but that time is very scarce. So I read the titles I definitely want to read, but I also just pick up, you know, titles or keys that, hey, I might get back to reading later. Or one things I like to do is I pick up also keys or comic books that not so much to flip or sell, just but kind of like invest in and then maybe sell later on. And those that I don't get to read, I usually will like to pick up later in trade paperback or omnibus form. So a lot of the stuff that I catch back up on, I actually end up reading, whether it's through Hoopla or trade paperbacks or omnibus, and then I don't ever touch the floppies. And if something hits, news hits, and I'm like, hey, I already got the stories to read and I can make some money selling the books, I'll put them up for sale.
We were talking a little bit before we came on here, but like like I said, I read a lot. Like I'm sitting here looking at all these short boxes, and these are legit books I bought just to read. And some of them have turned out to be valuable, some not so much. But I just wondered, because we were talking a little bit before, because I know sometimes there's a stigma. People collect different ways. There are sometimes people that collect nothing but keys, and there's nothing wrong with that. They collect big boy books. What's your thoughts on almost, because I will buy stuff sometimes just to resell, because it helps fund the hobby for me, because, like you said, dude, there's 100 titles comes out every week. And you can legit walk into an LCS and drop $100 to $200 like that if you really wanted to. So I don't think there's anything wrong with reselling and funding the hobby. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I would say I think as a collector, you kind of go through stages collecting. And there was a time where I was purely like into the message boards, trying to keep up with everything. Like, hey, this is going to be a hot title. This is going to be a key character. And buy kind of just a flip. And I went through that, and it did help fund the hobby. I don't flip as much. I do resell very rarely now. I mean, I have a website selling comic books, but a lot of times there's nothing on there just because I also mentioned time. There's a lot of time behind that where it's, hey, doing the research, buying the books ahead of time, kind of getting that out there, packing, shipping. We've talked on the channel before, like, hey, sometimes it's great to buy a book for cover and sell it for 10, but then with eBay fees, shipping materials, is the squeeze worth the juice, right?
Right.
But there's also a thrill in doing that. But for the most part right now, I buy the stuff I want to read with. At the same time, if it's something I think that might take off, I might pick up multiple copies. I'm not one of those guys who will buy 50 copies. I think at the most I might buy 5 copies or something. And even then, I'm also lazy enough to be like, miss that window where it takes off and comes back down. And I was like, oh, whatever.
No, I'm bad for that too, to be honest with you. Like, I think we're like brothers, because just in what you were saying, because I'm like that too. Like I do a lot of research just because I like to do that stuff.
Yeah, it's like geeking out on stuff.
Yeah, and so I like to look into it, and occasionally I'll flip something. And like I said, I watched my uncle do it for years, and he collected, but he sold a lot of stuff too, and that's how he funded everything he did. So do you collect anything now other than comic books? Like I see a He-Man Funko Pop behind you there. Do you collect any other stuff?
I won't say collecting is the right way, because it's not like I seek, but I do if I see something I like. And like I said, I'm really nostalgia driven. So like those 80s franchises, what my favorite, of course, is Masters of the Universe. But when you got like G.I. Joe, Transformers, I became more of a Power Rangers fan through the comic book. Like I said, that's kind of like the show. Wasn't a big fan of the show. It was also in my high school years, but I do like picking up stuff just because I think it's cool. Action figures, Funko Pops. I've started picking up some cards here again, like, Bowman baseball, Topps baseball. I've started picking up soccer cards just because I like soccer. Grew up playing some soccer. Sports I played growing up, majority of the years was soccer. Played high school football, some basketball. So those kind of drive into, and it's funny because you look back and a lot of the cards, probably yourself as well, that we collected as kids, we go back and be like, man, this has got to be worth a lot. And we look
at it, nothing.
It's not selling for much.
No, well, because they mass produce those things. Like, I didn't realize it at the time. I have I bet I have 25 King Griffey Jr. rookie cards in there that are worth nothing. And he's one of the greatest baseball players that ever lived. We grew up we apparently grew up in the exact same era, because all those shows that you mentioned, because I'm really nostalgia driven too. Like runs that I'm putting together right now are G.I. Joe, Star Wars, things like that, books that I missed or whatever. I'm going back, and I like to complete stuff sometimes. So I will put stuff like that together, but it's 100% nostalgia driven. And the same thing with ball cards. Like, I'm obviously from Kentucky, and, we have a lot of guys in the league and the NBA. And so I collect Kentucky guys. I collect Kentucky autographs, through cards.
I do the same thing for my teams, Florida State, Giants.
Yeah.
And it's just great because I zone in. I zone in on those. And it's funny because I actually went to a card show for like the first time in probably, 20 years since I was a kid. And I was looking for, and it was in DC area. I was looking for some Giants rookies, like some Buster Posey rookies. And it was similar to comic conventions where almost every table had the same cards, and it was whatever was hot right now. Right. Ohtani, Trout, LeBron, so there's gold in the digging, just like there is at cons. But a lot of times you ask them, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't really have that right now." But
yeah, no, and you're right. It is interesting. It's it's always the kind of the same stuff because it's what's hot, right? All right. So question 3, and it kind of something you just said. Like, I always like to know what people's favorite way to like find back issues and books are. Like, do you like going to flea markets or antique stores or yard sales or conventions, or like what's your favorite way to search for comics, or is it all the above?
It's somewhat all the above because there's something to say about all of it, right? There's something that's great about whether it's conventions or even antique shops. It's fun but it sucks at the same time. You're like, hey man, there's a whole bunch of antique shops. I wonder if they have, comics in there, and you strike out on comics. But sometimes you might find like a cool toy that isn't really an antique. Well, maybe it is an antique, but it's from your childhood, so I guess
Right.
we're antiques now. But I also like finding comics in extraordinary places you wouldn't find them. There's a bike store here locally. I mean, regular bicycle store called Mike's Bikes, and in the back he has like 30 long boxes of books that he sells. So it's funny because a lot of people don't know about it. So I'll go in there every now and then, and he goes and buys collections and adds to it. So some stuff you can get for great prices, and then there's some stuff that he's not a noob in the fact, but he also kind of knows more of the older copper, bronze, silver age stuff, but he picks up modern stuff. And sometimes you can find modern and even still copper and bronze for decent prices. And like you said, if you're building a run of stuff that you want to collect, those are great opportunities, because a lot of times when I'm building a run like that or collecting a series, I'm not looking for near mint 9/8. I'm good with fine, very fine, even sometimes very good, just to have it in that collection in case I want to go pop it out and read it every now and then.
No, absolutely, and that's part of the fun of the hobby, right? Is the gold digging. I mean, it's the hunt, and if you do find something really cool at like an antique store, or and you're like, oh, and you get a great deal on it, that's part of the thrill, man, of the hobby.
Yeah, I never get lucky enough for these people to find like an AF-15 hidden back there that no one knew about, that you see some of these stories, or not something that precious, but there's a lot of great finds out there. But a lot of times I'm happy if I find, hey, this is only worth $2, but man, there's a story behind this of what it means to me, or that time period, or whatever it is. And it was cool to find this. You guys might be like, that's stupid when I'm showing it, but to me it's like, dude, let me tell you about this book. And sometimes that the viewers or whoever you're telling that story to, they feed off that as well, because they have a similar experience. So I think it's great, and that's one of the things that makes the hobby great.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, man. Like I said, it's harder today. Like when I was a kid and I would go around with my uncle, and I mean, we would dig everywhere. You could find, like, we have found some crazy, crazy books over the years. Now, it's much harder today because of the internet. People know what they've got. They look at it, they find a Spider-Man book, they go look it up, they figure out, oh, this is worth some money. So it's much, much harder to find really good deals on stuff
or
like
they know
that.
what they got when you bring it up to them and they look it up at that point.
Yeah, that happens a lot at the LCSs I go to, the ones that are local. Like, you're back there, I'm doing all the work. I'm back there digging. You know you had this book, but I get up to the counter and you eBay price it. I said, oh man, come on. But yeah, that is absolutely part of the fun for sure. All right, so question 4, and I want to talk a little bit about the YouTube channel and your website. Talk to me a little bit about why you even started the channel.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? So like I mentioned earlier, there wasn't too many comic book fans down here, but now there is, because even my local comic book store, Third Eye, has expanded into like this big store. Not as big as their flagship store in Annapolis that anyone knows, Third Eye Comics, but it is huge compared to what we had at one time, was zero. So back then, like I said, I was online talking to people. I was in that Google Plus communities, a couple comic book communities in there. One of the big ones was at the time CBSI, and a lot of times, posting in there back and forth. And we got to where we started sharing like Google Docs of almost, hey, new comic book day lists, character spec lists or search lists. And it was fun and all, but then I was like, I'm just going to create a video because I don't want to sit here and type all this stuff out. So I started creating videos and sharing them to that G Plus community. And then it kind of turned into like, hey, I got all these videos. Why don't I just kind of put it on a channel? And that's kind of how Simpleman's Comics channel started. And it was picking books from previews, the 2 months prior, what's coming up to pre-order. And then it turned into like weekly picks at the time. So I was doing, hey, new comic book day, weekly picks. And then it just kind of, evolved from there into like a YouTube channel. And at the time I was, hey, I'm surprised people are watching outside the Google Plus community.
Yeah.
So then it's like, this is kind of fun. And you're meeting more comic book people. You're talking to other comic book people. Um, One of the hardest things, of course, is when you first do YouTube, you have some anxiety, you have some fear of, hey, is this going to be worth doing? And you just got to kind of do it. And then you kind of grow into it. You get more comfortable with it, just like anything else you do. I always tell people, hey, the first video you do is going to be your worst, but it's a starting point. And you also hear people say, man, there's just so many comic book YouTube channels out there. Well, there is, but there's only one of you. And that's what makes you and your channel unique. You could sit there, all these channels talk about the same exact thing, but you might have a different take on it. You might present it a different way. Your personality is what makes your channel unique and brings viewers to your channel as well.
Absolutely, I agree. I said, I started mine, and I've told this on here too, but this is the first time we're talking. I was My two daughters. That one day we were having breakfast, and they were like, I would like to do this on YouTube. I said, well, you should do it. You should try it. Guys buy all these clothes. Get on there and review them or do whatever. And they were like, oh no, we couldn't do that. And I'm like, why? I've taught you can legit do anything that you want to do. All you got to do is try. And they were like, no, we couldn't do it. And I said, well, I'm going to show you. And so I started a YouTube channel, and then I ended up falling in love. I found this whole thing that I didn't know I was missing. And that was this community, as you said earlier. It's just such a great community. And then too, the YouTube thing has almost become a hobby for me.
Yeah. They start geeking out on YouTube stuff, like, how to do stuff with videos, do different editing, it becomes a whole nother. I found where not only do I watch comic book YouTube videos, but I'm watching videos about YouTube. You start learning those terms like SEO, and you start turning thumbnails and tags, and it's a whole nother avenue to kind of just geek out on, and especially if you're like an IT geek or anything like that and love to do with computers. And it's another craft. It's another fun thing to do with video, photography, however you want to look at it.
Absolutely. It's another form of creativity. I never considered myself a creative person necessarily. I'm a numbers guy. My business that I own, it's numbers based, sales. But I don't know. I dig it. I've learned how to edit videos. I've learned how to do all these things. So that is one of the things I wanted to ask you too about your channel, because your channel is really solid. It's as far as the presentation of it's really good. Like, what would you say has been the biggest change from like when you started to now in the way that you run the channel?
Yeah, so when I first started out, it was just the similar thing. You use what you have, right? Which I tell everyone, because a lot of people, and myself was included, is when you start a channel, you're like, oh man, there's channels out there that their video looks great, their sound looks great. The biggest thing I also learned from doing research is the most important thing is audio. So as long as you sound, it doesn't have to be great. As long as you're understandable and people can hear what you're saying, that is more important than the quality of the video. And I also started out like a lot of people do, where I'm not on camera. I had an iPhone or a GoPro pointed at a wall with some graphics on it, but then I would, make slideshows with cover art for comic books, or do hauls, putting the book in front of the camera. And then I just gradually start and putting myself in there, because it's like, hey, there are a lot of channels. Your channel is great. You are unique, but also you tend to find things. Hey, what can I do that's kind of a little bit different to kind of stand out from other people? And then you just kind of keep evolving it that way. Once you feel comfortable doing one other thing, you start doing more research, and it's like, hey, how does lighting work? Or hey, if I can save money, can I buy a better camera? And do I use a webcam? Do I do live streams? Do I record? And that's a lot of choices and a lot of decisions, and it's something that could be scary. And I do not, hold back from creating some videos, because it's like, man, I don't think I'll do it well enough. I still have that where it's like, and then you just kind of make yourself do it. But all those choices are scary, but it's also part of the fun. It's like, hey, I'm not relying on this to feed my family. This is a hobby to me. Let's just put it out there and see how it goes, because that's how you grow as a creator as well.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I've tried my channel. I'm just now coming on a year that I've had my channel, and it's changed multiple times because you're talking about a 45, 46-year-old guy who had no clue. Like I watched YouTube, but I watched Metallica videos.
Yeah.
I watched music stuff. I would watch.
Yeah, I
Some
used to watch like Lions and
yeah.
stuff back like that wasn't on Nat Geo and things like that, or something you need to like, hey, how do I format a hard drive for PlayStation or those type things?
Right, exactly. And and it is not, I mean, I don't care what anybody tells you, it's a little weird to sit and talk to yourself in a camera.
Very weird.
You're talking to, obviously you're trying to talk to an audience, but when you first start, it's legit. You're very conscious that you're sitting there talking into a camera and you're the only person in the room.
It's even worse if there's you have a camera with like a monitor and you're looking at yourself in the monitor the whole time, but then when you play it back, it's like, man, I look like I'm looking off into the corner instead of
Yeah, no, absolutely. I said it's just funny. I said how, but I've grown into it. I've learned how to do new things. I'm much more comfortable, doing the videos now, and I try to do different stuff just to challenge myself. Like I'm real, and that I guess that kind of leads to this follow up question is, because you've had a lot of success with your YouTube channel, subscriber counts, views, things like that. Is there just a piece of advice you would give to somebody like me who is a smaller channel that is really just kind of, I'm just now getting close to that 1,000 sub mark, like that you would give, like, hey, be consistent, do your research, whatever, whatever. Is there one piece of advice that you would give?
One piece is kind of hard, but I mean, if I were to say one thing, it would be don't be discouraged. And I can't just say one thing because there's a couple, and it's going to sound cliche as I just hit my watch against the table, but just remember also it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, right? Because a lot of people there's different reasons for doing YouTube, and no matter what you do, you can say, hey, I just want to talk about comics, but you create a channel for reasons, and a lot of times you want those views, you want those subscribers. Just don't get discouraged about it. Keep doing what you're doing, and don't be scared to try different things, try different videos, try different, do Google search and see what topics people are talking about. Try to create those videos about topics that you kind of want to split it between, hey, you do a video for yourself because you really want to do that video, but then also find topics that people are searching for right now and kind of talk about those to kind of help you rank and search. There's a lot of geek type metrics in there, audience retention, click-through rate, thumbnails, super important because think about it as a comic book store. If you haven't heard of a title and you're looking on the rack and you're like, hey, that looks kind of cool, I'm going to check it out. Your thumbnail kind of serves that same purpose. And within that thumbnail, be cognizant of, hey, don't put too many words in there. And, if you do put words in there, don't make the font so small to read it, because you got to also think about everyone has computers, everyone uses Amazon Fire, but the majority of what they're looking at is their phone screen. So you want kind of something that as they're scrolling through, that thumbnail kind of sticks out to them. And I'm making that sound easy. Thumbnails for me is one of the hardest. I hate doing them because it's always like, I'll like it today, and then 3 days from now, I don't like it. So if I find something that sticks, I usually keep it, especially if I'm doing like the weekly videos, like final order cutoff, I kind of keep it the same because it also has that pattern. So once someone sees it and they're scrolling through, like, oh yeah, I know that one. That's a newer one of it though. So there's a bunch of stuff in there.
It's a great point. And, like your thumbnails, for example, like your logo, Simpleman, look, as soon as I see it, I know it's you. Yeah. And that thumbnails are as much about branding, I think, as anything. It's, it becomes immediately recognizable because when I see the Simpleman Comics logo, I know immediately that it's you. And, no matter what your thumbnail looks like, that logo, and then, because that's something I struggle with too, is the thumbnail. And it's just really because I am technically challenged, I guess, or technology challenged when it comes to things like that. But I've learned, my daughter it's funny because my oldest daughter is 15, and like she has to sit down and help me. Sometimes she has to teach me how to use the app, so I can actually edit the thumbnail. So but I think those are all great suggestions.
And there's a lot of, I'm sure other people come on here and talk about it too, but if, you don't have to have like the greatest software to create thumbnails. There's a bunch of free software out there, Canva. You can Google, create free YouTube thumbnails, and there's great tutorials out there as well. And then just one other thing is it kind of tells a story. Your title and your thumbnail, they tell a story. So don't feel like you have to put the whole title of your video in your thumbnail, because sometimes they might see that and then the title's right next to it. You could put like buzzwords or, I usually try to keep it like 6 to 7 words if I'm putting it in the thumbnail, and then the title might be a little bit longer, but that's just my opinion, what works for me. I am by no means a YouTube guru. It's just me, lessons learned, stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work. But it's also part of the fun. I mean, I have no desire to quit my job, be a full-time YouTuber. It's just enjoying it, enjoying meeting new people in the community.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love it. All right, so let's talk a little, I guess, more topical. The next few questions will be more topical, and so this is question 5, and the prices in the comic market right now have just been insane, right? Like for the past year, and I'm kind of looking at that, and I'm like, okay, because that's more my wheelhouse, okay, as far as what I understand about business and marketing. That COVID had part to do with that. Because people were bored and didn't have anything to do. So they were looking at that. Then you have the MCU, the DCU, all the things you mentioned earlier, that are kind of driving the pop culture hobby now. Then you had all this money coming out, this stimulus money that people didn't have to actually work for or earn, and whatever your politics are, it doesn't matter. That money was there. And so people, I think, had extra money to spend. So you saw this just, especially for the past year and a half, this just massive rise in prices. So what do you do you think that can sustain itself?
I mean, anytime you see a hike like that, as a general answer, no. But I do think there's going to be some outliers there. But I also see you're always getting new blood into the hobby. And when you get fresh blood into the hobby, there's a certain level. I don't want to say ignorance, but kind of novice to it. And they start learning research of, hey, checking eBay prices, and if your last few sales are higher up there, the prices will continue to go. So it gets to a point where anyone that's getting into comic collecting, or anything in life, you kind of learn by experience, right? And I've learned, when you first go back into the hobby, it's almost like you get this. Anything new, you get that honeymoon stage where you're just buying, give me, buying stuff. Oh, this is going to be hot. This is going to be new. This is option. And it's even more of a fervor now because we have a lot more stuff being optioned daily than what you did back in like 2008 to 2012, MCU, other stuff. But yes, I do think at some point there might be a correction, but it also depends on, what your experience is, and then what's your motive from your collection. Like we talked about at the beginning of this video, if you're just a reader, you're not going to go and spend all that much money unless it's something that you absolutely have. I mean, FOMO is a hell of a drug, right?
Dude, that's what I was going to say. Is I didn't even know what FOMO was until like the last year, right? Like FOMO, what I didn't even know what that was, and I actually had to Google it. And I'm not joking. That's how old I am. I actually had to Google it, and for the fear of missing out. But it is 100% a real thing.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, there's still things. FOMO is a hell of a drug. There's still stuff. I look at it as my personal risk, right? It's what do I want to spend into it? What do I want to take out of it? Is that too much for me? How do I feel about it? But if there's something that I really, really want to add to my collection and it's worth it to me, I'm going to spend the money on. But I don't go out and buy a lot of stuff. One thing I have learned from collecting is, you kind of find your own path within your collecting. Some things you do search after, but a lot of stuff, just because people are talking about it, I don't go out and buy it, because a lot of times if you've been collecting long enough, you see that it comes in cycles. 4 years ago, people were talking about a character or an option news, spikes, kind of drops back down. A couple years go by. Next thing you know, that character's hot again. It spikes again. I mean, you're seeing it with like people are starting to talk about Mask. I mean, there's a property you understand, right? The old cartoon Mask. When it first talk about the Allspark verse or the Hasbro verse, Mask was one of them, and it took off, kind of died down a little bit. People are starting to talk Mask again, so books are kicking up. It's just learning from your own experience and then the risk that you're willing to take. But I to answer your question, yeah, I don't see the prices being sustainable. I mean, even retail prices, you can talk non-secondary market. It's crazy because you and I mean, I'm close to you. I'm 43, almost 44. So We talked about spinner racks. We talked about riding bikes up to the card shop or the comic book shop and, buying a comic with your allowance. I don't see how outside of Free Comic Book Day, Halloween Fest, it's harder to bring kids into the hobby nowadays unless you're just, spoiling your kids with comic books.
Absolutely, 100%. Like when I go into my LCS, dude, I rarely see kids buying comic books. It's people my age, or a little younger that are in there buying them because they have that disposable income, right? I mean, like when I was a kid, you got a comic book because you were at the grocery store and your mom let you get one.
Yeah. Or your mom wanted you to shut up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, here, shut up and read this. Or if you're like me and grew up with an uncle who sold, at flea markets and things like that, then, I got to read everything he had. If he had a book there and I wanted to read it, which is funny, like today he would never let me read them because, you're not supposed to read the books. Yeah. But back then he didn't care. He was like, yeah, I'll just grab something and read it, and I would sit up around his table and sit there and read comic books.
Roll it up, have it in your back pocket.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy, to think about it. And I believe you're right, though, and everybody does experience that, including me. Like when I started out, dude, I was buying everything, like every cover A, B, C, D. It didn't matter. If it was Superman,
I'd have like a $250 pull list, like bi-weekly from Midtown Comics. I'd set it up on Midtown, and as soon as I heard someone talking about something, I would, adding that.
Yeah, no, and you go through that. I said it's funny how it works, and then now there are certain titles that I buy just because I love them, and there are places to read comics online where there's some other places, if you want to read something online, see if you like it, you can without having to invest that money, and so I do a lot of that too, just to see if there's something I want. And I do still do the research and, kind of from the spec standpoint, but I think what you're really going to see bottom out is the new stuff, but you see it already because like, let's say Nottingham has been a really hot book, right?
And a great book at that.
Yeah. And it's a phenomenal book and it may hold its value, but you may be in a year, it may be back to cover price,
right.
And that happens if you wait long enough and you don't have that FOMO, then you can generally buy the stuff at cover if it's something that you want.
And it's funny because you bring up a great point as well, because you often hear that, especially with indie comics, like, hey, they don't sustain their value, which is a great point because a lot of times I don't know if it'll go back down to cover price, but yeah, the prices will drop. But I'm starting to see that now with big two books, especially when you're talking about, MCU, DCU, where they don't sustain their value as much either because they spike when a character casting gets made.
Yep.
But then the movie comes out and the character's kind of trash in the movie, Taskmaster. But there's also an alternative to that point too, because Taskmaster is still a beloved character. It's made its reputation within that comic book. So there's the devil's advocate where it kind of beats indie comics with that because, hey, yeah, it might drop again, but still people are drawn and love that character more so than some of these indie comics. But there are still also similarities we're seeing with just rises and drops.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what you would consider blue chip books, the big keys, I think those books they're like stocks. They're always going to appreciate in value, A, because of their age, and two, because of their scarcity. I think you'll see, over time, those books will continue. Like the 90s, everything was mass produced, right? Comic books, everything was just, was crazy, ball cards, the whole gauntlet.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. So question 6, and this comes directly from something I saw on your channel. And you interviewed Chancellor. He was the comic book division manager for Whatnot. And in seeing that, and I thought it was interesting, kind of one of the, I guess the kind of a angle that you took with it was the innovation that's occurred during COVID. If there's anything that you could say was good about COVID, obviously it was awful in a lot of ways. But from an innovation standpoint, and I can tell you in my own business, in my mortgage company, that we do business completely different now than we did before COVID. It's much more digital. It's much more. But I thought it was interesting the angle you took with him of the innovative part. And I wanted you to talk a little more about that, for people who maybe didn't see that. And if you haven't, you need to jump over to Simpleman's channel and check that out. It was a really, really good interview and a really a fledgling company, in some senses with Whatnot. Started out as kind of a Funko only place, but now is going into trading cards and comic books and things like that. But talk about the innovation, things like Whatnot, and how you think that's going to affect the market and the way people sell comics moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because Whatnot, they've been around before the pandemic, so it's not like they just created it during it, because like you mentioned, Funko, Pokemon, but yeah, just what we discussed, and kind of what you've probably seen too is from your business, we see a lot more remote. We've seen a lot more Zoom. We've seen a lot more YouTube channels. I mean, we saw Comic-Con over Zoom. So, and within that also, people weren't going to stop collecting comics. And you mentioned it earlier with stimulus checks, you're still having some money. There are some people that had hardships that, couldn't do it, but we did see a lot of people. The buying didn't slow down. So you saw a lot of Facebook live sales, Instagram live sales, and then Whatnot kind of moved into that comic book market as well, saying, hey, you're not just sales here, but we also have a social aspect for it. A lot of people that have watched that videos right now, they're like, hey, if you're an introvert, you don't like talking on a camera or whatever, I like eBay Marketplace. I just want to list my book up there and have someone come and find it. But I do like the innovative aspect where they're taking the comic book community, taking their input, and they're adding it to that app. Whatnot app is available, Google, Android, and people from all over the community. You're seeing, if you're on Instagram and you're a comic collector, I'm sure you're seeing daily multiple people sharing their Whatnot profile, like, hey, I just joined. And there's live streams on there only right now. There's a wait list to join to sell, but you're seeing those live streams, and it's not just your normal, hey, this is a book, auction buy. You actually have almost like a social interaction there, where you can go in there and just hang out. You're chatting with people. People are making the experience more enjoyable, and just instead of just transactional, where it's a community in itself, and you can follow those people. You can jump in and out of different streams, and whether comics, Pokemon, any type of collectible, they're getting ready to move into sneakers. They're getting ready to move into vintage clothes. So all that's great.
I think so too, and it is nice to have an alternative to eBay. You got eBay, you got Mercari, you got some of those other online short box. There's a bunch of different places to sell, but I really dig the way Whatnot is almost taken like the community aspect of it, excuse me, and moved into that. And I think that's pretty cool. And again, if you saw anything, just the innovation in the way to do business has changed a great deal.
Yeah, and one of the great things is, especially if you're a seller and you're used to eBay, like the caveat is, hey, there's still kind of that 8% seller's fee, but your shipping's taken care of for you. They've got you can batch print your shipping labels off, and you can adjust it. Because one of the questions I had was like, hey, is it all there and I just get what I get? What if I'm selling a slab? What if I'm selling a lot? How do I change it? Can I change the weight? Can I change, from first class to priority? All that's available there when you finish your live stream. You can go in there and adjust the weight, and just batch print your shipping labels out, and it's all taken care of for you.
That's cool. Yeah, no, Whatnot, like I said, they're fledgling when it, like I said, they've been around for a while, but when it comes to, I think, really just popping out there, they're kind of new, especially in our world as far as the comic book community. So now question 7 is something else. Again, it's another video I saw on your channel, but I thought was interesting, and I thought might be an interesting topic, and that's Jay-Z and Rock Nation, and some other groups purchased CGC. And I just, I watched your video, but I want, you to talk a little about what do you think that means for like comic book grading? Because obviously CGC has been a problem. Like getting a comic book graded right now, it takes a year, or not that long, but it takes a minute. What do you see with that acquisition? Do you see anything changing?
Yeah, it's been crazy because, I mean, that topic was this past week's show. Between that topic and their exclusive variant topic, it had a lot of inputs, and it was great because you saw a bunch of different points of view and different opinions on it, which always makes for great content. But yeah, right now turnaround times for CGC aren't great. But I think that's part of what we've been going through, because you could see that in all the collectible markets. You've seen trading cards take off, right? PSA, they're not taking get hardly any submissions for trading cards right now. The turnaround times for a lot of stuff is bad. And we got into, Jay-Z, Rock Nation. that's the name that's thrown out there because I think that's what a lot of the public can identify for.
Right.
But
Sure.
the investor group, was it Blackstone? They've acquired CGC's parent company, so it's not just comic books. It's like the money, anything that they certify. So we also talked, is it going to be good or bad for CGC? And some people thought it was, some people thought it wasn't, because a lot of times when you look at those investor groups, who they answer to, right? Investors, and what is their purpose? Is to make a profit. So do you think that attention is going to be taken off comic books? Do you think, will they add staff? One of the panels from Brian McClay, who's on Tales from the Flipside channel, brought up the idea of he would like to see like satellite, not just in Sarasota, but open different grading centers around at least in Conus to satisfy some of that turnover and turnaround times, getting stuff in. But I want to see how it plays out, because on the surface you're like, oh, it's great because you see, Jay-Z coming in, investor group taking over CGC. But we had something similar a couple years ago with CBCS. It wasn't a big investing group like Blackstone, but we saw Beckett. I mean, if you're a trading card fan, Beckett.
Absolutely.
We subscribed to Beckett back in the day. They acquired CBCS, and I didn't see much of a change. Even to this day, I don't know much of a change. I personally am more, my opinion is I'm more of a CBCS guy than CGC. It's just where I fall on. It can be cliche. I think they grade a little bit better, but CGC, I also admit, for market share, if you're selling right now, you can make a little bit more money selling CGC, but I also think that gap is slowly closing.
I do
and
too.
Some of that, and it also reminds me of Marvel and DC comics, where for a certain time you're going to hear one's better than the other. So whenever CGC gets hit with, hey, their turnaround time sucked, the grading sucks, I'm getting cracked cases, I'm getting hair in my case, I'm getting the rings inside the case, I'm going to CBCS, but then next thing you know, CBCS has some issue. So there's always yin and yang to it, but I want to see how it plays out, because right now, if they just look after the investor and don't look after the collector and try to do anything to improve that, whether it's hire more graders, increase those, decrease the turnaround times. But I think outside looking in, there's probably maybe even bigger problems that they want to address, and how to get the comics back in the hands of people quicker.
Right.
Or if they're going to overlook it, how we're going to do sneakers and video games, comics is going to, be overlooked.
Well, no, and that was one of the things, like in my mind, I was like, I wonder if there's going to be like any kind of cool cross production, like, can they come up with something cool? Like, what could they take with comic books and grading and incorporate with their other, their other entities and their other properties and do anything? So I don't know. I'm like you. A lot of times when it becomes investor based, it becomes about money. And not about the customer necessarily. And that is a bit concerning. So question 8 is something that you actually just mentioned and mentioned earlier as well. And it's a question, I've asked this question on every 10 questions for probably the last 15, because I get a different answer every single time. And so I'm just going to ask you 2, and that's about the indie market. You mentioned that, you had always kind of went to the indies, really other than the big 2 anyway, kind of move that direction. And there's a lot of talk, man. People are talking about that a lot, where it's almost like it's a golden era for indie comic books. And people are still buying the big 2 because, like you said, it's nostalgia. It's Spider-Man, it's Superman, it's Batman, it's, the Hulk, all those characters we loved. But even myself, like when I'm reading each week, like I see myself going to the indie books first, to read. And why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that people are kind of moving or, going that direction versus, going to DC or Marvel?
I think it's also just to get different stories. I mean, I think there's multiple reasons, but the big one for me is different stories. I love superhero stories, but I also like indies where it's different. I'm a big fan of horror comics. I'm a big fan of fantasy. You can find some of that in the big 2, but it also is, there's more freedom for, there's more freedom for creators in small press, right? If you're writing Spider-Man, if you're writing one of those big 2 characters, you have to stay in a very confined swim lane, and you can't go out of it. Where And I think a lot of those creators that are writing the big two, they develop storylines in their mind for stuff that they want to write, and they can go over to create their own. Whether it's and it's funny because we say indie, but now it's indie, and some of those indies is you almost do have to just say small press because they're not so much indie anymore when you're looking at like
Right.
Boom and Image, and then all the imprints within Image. But and one thing also is I think we've seen that change that has been popular, which wasn't popular years ago, is smaller arcs, smaller stories, smaller issues, smaller, I won't say print runs, but it's harder to, if you're a comic book reader going, hey, I don't want to pick up issue number 67, even if it is part of a new arc. So you're seeing marketing wise where they're doing that chapter driven type story arcs where it's like, hey, volume 1 is 6 issues, volume 2 is 6 issues. Kanto is a great one for that.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times that helps with readers going, hey, if I'm new and I'm going into the comic book, I'm not going to pick up issue 67. I could pick up issue 3. But then now you're also seeing, hey, there's issue 3. Yeah, issue 1 and 2 is not there, but now it is because a lot of them are doing additional printings for it. So each time a newer issue comes out, you're getting a later printing of issue 1 and 2, so you can go and pick up the chunk and not start right in the middle of the story.
Right. No, and I think that's great. Like I said, and that's a little different answer. I've received that. So I'm gonna keep asking it until somebody gives me the same answer. It's like because everybody has a different reason why, they do it. A lot of it is story driven. Like it is, and they have freedom, right? They have freedom to write. I mean, they can write what they want. Whereas with the big two, you got a continuity. You kind of got to stay within. And so, yeah. All right. Question 9. And this is the last 2 questions are really just kind of some, get to know you a little better, outside of comic books, or at least this one is. I always see you wearing the Florida State hat, the San Francisco hat. We talked a little bit about it. What other interest does the Simpleman have? I mean, are you a sports fan? Do you like one of the movies? Do you like to go to the theater? Are you into the ballet? Like, what do you like to do?
Definitely ballet. No, nothing against ballet, but yeah, I'm not. So I'm like I say, nostalgia driven. So growing up as a kid, I'm born in Richmond, Virginia, but lived in Germany a lot of those years, early 80s. And there wasn't much to do as far as TV. You had one channel. So that's where I became a big movie guy because we would have people from the States sending us movies and TV shows over on VHS and Betamax. And so, or you go to the video rental store. So I started enjoying a lot of movies, and that just carried over. To this day, I love movies. I love going to movie theaters. Saw Cruella, which was like the first movie I got to see in the theater since the pandemic. And then I just recently took the family to see Black Widow 2 days ago. So I do love the theater, love the smell of popcorn. Big sports guy. My teams are well varied. Florida State, of course, for college. San Francisco Giants for baseball. And then my middle school, high school years grew up in Northern Virginia, so I'm a Washington team guy for, Washington football team now is what I guess we're calling it.
Yeah.
Capitals for hockey. I'm not a big basketball guy. I do root for Florida State just for the college, but I don't watch much NBA. And huge curling fan, but not really. And I like watching soccer. Especially, you got the Copa Cup coming up. I watch some Premier League, especially now with Paramount Plus. And like you said, with the online and streaming now, some of that stuff's easier to find and see. But yeah, and other hobbies, I like a good cigar. I like whiskey and bourbon. But summertime, I love being out at concerts in the grass, drinking beer. Big country music fan, rock music fan. I like all music, but I like different music in different situations. If it's like a barbecue or a concert in the summertime, I love me some good country music and a beer.
There you go. I like it. Yeah, well, like I said, I'm in Kentucky. We are the home of bourbon, and I say bourbon, fast horses and beautiful women, so it's no, I completely get it, man. And Florida State, I don't know, and again, it's one of those things because I'm a big sports fan.
Yeah.
Living in Kentucky, we don't have pro teams, so college is the thing, and I would always see
It's so much better than pro anyways.
Yeah, well, no, really, I think it is anyway. But but I always would see if that Florida State hat on. I would always think about our football coach, Mark Stoops, was the defensive coordinator for Florida State back when I guess they won the national championship, several years ago with Jimbo. And so I always think of that when I would see with that hat on. I was like, hey, our head coach is came from there, came from Florida State. He's killing it up here. We actually have a real football team for a change. So
Yeah. Stoops was great as a DC, but at the same time, whenever you're a fan, you hate to see someone go, but you love to see them grow within their coaching career. And it's funny because, especially with Jimbo at the time, it's like I didn't want to see him go, but then when you see stuff that comes out behind the scenes afterwards, it's like, yeah, not that I was a big fan of Willie Taggart at the time, but
yeah.
We'll see. And it's great to see what old Norvell will do in his second year at the system.
No, I'm looking forward to it. I'm a big college football fan. Obviously college basketball. You live in Kentucky, you're born to be a college basketball fan. So when you come out of the womb, they hand you a Big Nation T-shirt, and let's go. So all right, question 10, and the last question for you, man, is: are there any comic book grails that you're chasing right now? Is there anything that you're on the hunt for?
There's one book that I'm on the hunt for right now. It's just to preface that, like I spent it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago where I finished that hunt, but I spent like 4 or 5 years before all this Masters of the Universe news came. Masters of the Universe is kind of bigger right now. I won't say big, but I spent 4 or 5 years chasing that 1986 Marvel Star Run, issues 1 through 13, all in 9.8. I didn't care if it was CGC, CBCS, PC, but yeah, I was killing myself trying to get those. I was at cons, I was searching online, I was searching in stores, and I didn't want to risk buying a bunch of raws trying to get it graded because I didn't have the money or time for that. So I finally finished that, and then I was like, what's next? I still pick up Masters of the Universe when I see them cheap, whether it's raw, graded, other titles, the Image, the NBC, the DC. But the one grail that I'm hunting right now is I'm a huge Disney fan. I just love Disney. Again, nostalgia driven, right? Disney Vacation Club, take our family to Disney World every couple of years. But that Disney Comics and Stories #1, graded and low grade because it's super expensive. 2.5, I think it's $3,800, $4,000 last time I looked. Raw, it doesn't matter, but that's kind of the one grail that I'm hunting for right now. And other than that, I don't have too much on my radar, but it, like you said, anytime you're out hunting and you see something, you're like, oh yeah. And it's crazy about that because those type trips will start another grail hunt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've ran in somewhere and picked up, but that's what started my latest G.I. Joe is I was at this flea market and I came across all these G.I. Joe books, that original run. And I thought, and I got them at a really, really good price. And so they were great condition, the whole thing. I picked them up. And then I was like, okay, now I'm going to have to do this. Now I'm going to have to collect all this. So, yeah, no, it's a lot of fun.
I do still need I would like to get, because I have Thundercats, Massive Universe. One thing that I don't have is, I have a couple raw, high grade G.I. Joes, but, I'd like to get a 9.8 G.I. Joe #1 and a 9.8 Transformers #1. Just kind of, like we said, that nostalgia, 80s Saturday morning cartoon type thing.
Absolutely, man. I know. I mean, every day before I went to school, I watched G.I. Joe. I watch G.I. Joe right now on YouTube. There's that channel.
And Tubi, Tubi. I watch it all the time on Tubi.
Yeah, I mean, all the time I watch it as we speak. And that's my 10 questions. So I want to give you a chance real quick for the people who are watching that aren't following Simpleman's Comics. You've got the YouTube channel, you've got the website. Talk to people about where they can find you.
Yeah, so a lot of times, I'll be straight up and honest, I haven't kept the website up as much. So trying to get some work done on that, but definitely you can find me on YouTube, Instagram. I'm on Facebook, but the biggest places to find me in interactive is YouTube and Instagram. I'm on Twitter as well. But I have some great content coming up. I just recorded an interview with the fourth interview they've been on. This is the fourth time they've been on my channel with Kanto creators David Boer, Drew Zucker. That Kanto 3 Lionheart edition #1 is hitting store shelves July 14th. So make sure you guys check that out. And I'll have that video up here soon. And I got another great video interview with Attack Peter. I don't know if you guys know who Attack Peter is. He does a lot of great kaiju screen printings. He's been doing a lot of collaborations with Skybound. Skybound is about to have their new Expo, July 17th and 18th coming up as well. Within that, they're going to have a Comics Vault Live where they sell a lot of great graded comic books. Attack Peter is going to have a variant in that Comics Vault Live. I can't say it right now, but that video will be going live after the embargo has been lifted. So I'm sure you guys, if you follow Skybound, you'll know what that book is. But it was a great interview with Peter Santa Maria is his real name. He goes by Attack Peter. Awesome creator. He does that old school block printing. I messed up and called it screen printing during the interview. And he's like, no, it's block printing. I was like, but I mean, carves it out of linoleum. It's almost like a lost form of art, the way digital and everything works right now. But so those are two pieces of content. And then, of course, every Tuesday night at 9 p.m., we have that Comic News Weekly live stream where we have some other YouTubers on there, some Patreon members. It started out, hey, Patreon members, you guys want to do a live stream? I got a few people, and then I filled it in with some other friends. And I hope to get you on there sometime as well, because it's great. It's great to get different people from the community, different opinions in the live chat, and we just talk about a couple headlines from the week and find out what people are talking about within comic books.
Cool, man. Yeah, no, it's a great channel, guys. If you're not watching it, like I said, there's a lot of really, really good content. I like the weekly comic book show. I also like the Final Order cutoff videos. The interviews are always solid. There's always, Brian does a great job of figuring out what is popular or what people are talking about, and then talking about it on his channel, as from a news standpoint. So it's really cool. It's a great channel. You should definitely go over there and check him out. I'll leave all his information in the description below, so that way you can find him. I'll link you to all his social media, to his YouTube channel, the whole thing. Go over and check him out. Go check his website out. You have the ability to become a Patreon member there as well. Go check that out. There's some cool benefits as far as being, becoming a patron with his channel. So, all right, guys, that is it for me. The last thing, as we always talk about here on 10 Questions, is my 10% discount code with Street Level Hero LA. That is STC10. Go over there, use that code, get 10% off your order. But most importantly, 25% of your overall order is donated to the American Cancer Society for cancer research. And that's a great cause. We've done great. JPG, he was like, this is for a limited time, and it just keeps going. Like, he's like, all right, man, let's just keep rolling. We're doing well. People have responded really well to it, so we appreciate it. Guys, what can I say? This has been a phenomenal interview. Go over, check out Brian at Simpleman's Comics. This has been 10 Questions.